You're 45. Your job is automating. You think you're too old to change careers. You're wrong. Here's why and how. Welcome back to the podcast, Surviving AI with Carlo Thompson.
Thanks for having me. I'm ready to get into this one.
Me too. And just a quick note for you listening. Moving forward, we are going to treat this as what it truly is. It's a deep dive.
Yeah.
Because today, we're tackling the age question head on.
It's the elephant in the room.
It really is. This is the tactical playbook for the reality we're all facing right now. If artificial intelligence is coming for your job and you aren't, a 25-year-old digital native with zero responsibilities, zero mortgage, and zero back pain, what is the actual concrete plan?
Right. What do you actually do?
Exactly. What do you do when the ground is quite literally shifting under your feet? The answer, as we're going to explore in excruciating detail today, depends entirely on three critical factors. First, how many working years you actually have left in the tank. Second, what your financial runway looks like right this second. And third, your absolute unvarnished willingness to pivot.
I'd argue it's the most urgent conversation in the modern economy right now. And to build this playbook, we haven't just looked at a few opinion pieces or blogs.
No, we went deep.
We did. We've pulled together an incredibly comprehensive, really heavy stack of sources. We're looking at official demographic and enforcement reports from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC.
Yep.
We have extensive global labor data from the OECD. We are unpacking highly specific return on investment studies from medical and nursing schools. We're parsing through detailed surveys from the American Institute for Economic Research.
The AIU data is fascinating, by the way.
It's wild. And finally, we're looking at complex, multivariable economic models that detail exactly what happens when the silver tsunami, which is our rapidly aging workforce, collides directly with the silicon tsunami of artificial intelligence and enterprise automation.
Two massive waves hitting at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a massive amount of data to synthesize. But when you lay it all out, it paints a very clear, if intimidating, picture.
And that picture is specifically for you, whether you are staring down a looming layoff that your manager refuses to confirm, but is coming.
We've all been there.
Right. Or you're just feeling that subtle, terrifying shift in your industry where things you used to do by hand, or maybe with a legacy spreadsheet, are suddenly being handled by an algorithm in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
This deep dive gives you the honest assessment and the concrete plan. We aren't going to sugarcoat the challenges. We are not going to pretend it's easy, but we are absolutely going to show you the way out.
This raises an important question, though. Before we can start drawing up battle plans and career pivots, we really have to establish the reality of the terrain.
Lay the groundwork.
Right. Just how hostile is the current job market to older workers who are trying to adapt or change lanes? Because before we can build a strategy, we have to acknowledge the reality of the battlefield.
It's not great, is it?
It's really not. The data on age bias is not just anecdotal. It's not just, people feeling slighted after a bad interview. It is structural, it is systemic, and it is highly measurable.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you say it's measurable, what are we actually looking at? Because a lot of people might think, well, experience is valued. Companies want senior leadership.
Sure, they say that.
Are you saying the data contradicts that entirely?
In many sectors, yes.
Yeah.
It contradicts it violently. Let's look at that joint study published by the AARP and the ARER.
The American Institute for Economic Research.
Exactly. They conducted an exhaustive survey of the labor market, and they found a staggering 78% of people between the ages of 40 and 65 have either personally experienced or directly witnessed age discrimination in the workplace.
Wait, 78%.
78%.
So we are talking about nearly 8 out of 10 older workers operating in an environment where their age is actively held against them.
That's the reality.
Hold on, though. How do they define discrimination in that context? Is that just someone making an off-color joke about them not understanding TikTok, or is it actual career-limiting behavior?
It is absolutely the latter. The survey tracks actionable metrics, things like being passed over for promotions in favor of younger, less experienced colleagues, or being excluded from critical training on new technologies because management just assumes they won't get it.
Wow.
Or, most severely, being targeted during rounds of layoffs, specifically because their higher tenure-based salaries make them attractive targets for cost-cutting.
The expensive older worker.
Right. And it's not just the employees reporting this. A parallel survey of hiring managers revealed that 38% explicitly admitted to reviewing applications with an age bias.
I have to stop you there. 38% of hiring managers admitted it out loud. On a survey.
On the record, yeah.
You have to wonder if nearly 40% are comfortable essentially confessing to a discriminatory hiring practice on paper. How many more are doing it unconsciously or just keeping quiet about it?
Precisely. The actual number of managers filtering out resumes based on graduation dates or years of experience is likely much, much higher.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of recent economic history, we have to talk about what economists are now calling the Great Shedding.
The Great Shedding. I remember during the pandemic, the media narrative was entirely different.
Oh, completely.
It was all about the Great Retirement or the Great Resignation. The story we were told was this idea that millions of older workers, empowered by a booming stock market, just voluntarily took their 401ks, packed up their desks, and headed to the golf course.
Yeah, the triumphant exit.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
was painted as this mass voluntary exit from the labor force.
It was painted that way, but an Urban Institute study completely debunks that myth. They looked at the actual labor flows and the financial realities of those older workers who supposedly retired in glory.
And what did they find?
They revealed that 56% of workers in their 50s who had stable employment prior to the disruptions of the last few years were actually pushed out or laid off.
Oh, wow.
They did not leave voluntarily, they were shed.
56%. More than half of all stable workers in their 50s were forced out. That is a brutal reality check.
It gets worse. The most chilling statistic from the Urban Institute's research is the recovery rate.
Okay.
Of those 56% who were pushed out, only 10% of them ever fully recouped financially. Let that sink in.
1 in 10.
Only 1 in 10 managed to find a new role that paid them what they were making before the disruption.
So what happened to the rest, the other 90%?
They either took massive permanent pay cuts, settled for underemployment and gig work, or simply gave up and permanently exited the labor force, entirely depleting their savings far ahead of schedule.
So when we talk about the danger of AI coming for your job at 45 or 55, the stakes are existential. If you get knocked off the ladder at that age, the statistical probability of climbing back to your previous rung is incredibly low.
Exactly. And this phenomenon is particularly pronounced, almost aggressively so, in the technology sector. If you look at the enforcement data from the EEOC,
The federal agency that enforces civil rights laws.
right, against workplace discrimination.
Yeah.
Nearly 20% of all discrimination charges filed specifically in the tech industry are age-related.
How does that compare to the rest of the economy?
The market average across all other industries combined is about 15%. So
Yeah.
tech is significantly higher.
Almost a third higher.
Yeah. The technology sector has a profound, almost pathological obsession with youth. They often mask age bias behind coded language,
Like what?
like saying they're seeking a cultural fit, or wanting someone with high energy, or looking for a digital native.
Right.
These are essentially euphemisms for, we want someone in their 20s who doesn't have a family and will work 80 hours a week.
And the irony is, by actively filtering out anyone over 40, they are shooting themselves in the foot economically.
Without question. The economic cost of all this ageism is staggering, not just to the individuals, but to the macroeconomy.
Tell me about the Economist Intelligence Unit model.
Yeah, they ran a massive model to estimate the cost to the U.S. economy in lost productivity, meaning the economic value that would have been created if older workers were fully utilized instead of marginalized. They estimated that cost at $850 billion.
$850 billion.
And the tech sector alone is bleeding $44 billion a year simply because they refuse to utilize experienced talent. They are literally paying a multi-billion-dollar ignorance tax to maintain a youthful aesthetic.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because hearing those numbers, the 10% recovery rate, the $850 billion in lost productivity, the blatant bias, if you are listening to this right now in your late 40s or 50s, you might feel like turning the audio off.
It's heavy.
It is.
Yeah.
You might feel like the game is entirely rigged against you, that there's no point in fighting it. But here is the tactical counterpunch for you. You do not have to play their game. You don't have to try to force your way into a tech startup that only wants 22-year-olds willing to sleep under their desks. You pivot to what we are going to call protected careers. In these specific fields, age bias doesn't just disappear. Age actually becomes your greatest asset.
That is a crucial paradigm-shifting distinction. We are not talking about begging for a seat at a table that doesn't want you. We are talking about leveraging exactly what you have that a recent college graduate simply cannot replicate, no matter how many AI prompts they know how to write.
Exactly. We call it the maturity dividend. If you are listening to this, I want you to really think about what you bring to the table at 45 or 55 or 60. First, you have massive, entrenched professional networks. You actually know people.
Real human connections.
Second, you have decades of knowing how to talk to people face to face. You know how to de-escalate a conflict with an irate client. You know how to read a room during a tense negotiation. You know how to navigate complex organizational politics. These are soft skills that an artificial intelligence cannot emulate, and that a 25-year-old simply hasn't had the time on this earth to build.
I would absolutely add to that list deeply honed judgment. This is arguably the most valuable component of the maturity dividend.
How so?
When you've been in the workforce for 25 years, you know what a real houses on fire crisis looks like versus a minor speed bump. A junior employee might panic over a missed email. A veteran knows how to triage the situation, calm the team down, and systematically solve the problem.
Perspective.
Yes, you have the discipline to see a grueling multi-year project through to completion without burning out after 3 months.
And crucially, you likely have some degree of financial stability. Even if things are tight, you are generally in a different position than someone fresh out of school. You might have home equity. You might have a 401k you can borrow against in an absolute emergency. You might have a spouse who is also working, providing a baseline of household income. You have the structural runway to make a strategic, calculated move.
And the global data from the OECD completely validates this proactive approach.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Right. They track labor statistics across dozens of developed nations. And what's fascinating here is the statistical relationship between job mobility and age.
Explain job mobility for a second, just to make sure we're on the same page.
Job mobility is simply the rate at which people switch careers, change employers, or pivot into entirely new industries. And what the OECD data shows is that job mobility drops precipitously as we age.
How much of a drop?
It goes from about 17% for workers under the age of 30 down to just 7% by the time workers hit 45. Human nature takes over.
Right.
People get comfortable, they get a mortgage, they have kids, they settle into a routine, and they freeze in place. They become terrified of starting over.
Which is completely understandable. The perceived risk of leaving a stable paycheck at 35 to try something new feels insurmountable.
It feels that way, yes. But the OECD found that those who do make the jump at that age, those who overcome the paralysis and proactively change lanes, are overwhelmingly successful in the long run.
Right. The success rate for the risk takers is actually huge.
It's mathematically undeniable. The OECD tracked long-term employment outcomes. They found that the likelihood of a 60-year-old still being gainfully employed in a good role is 62% if they proactively change jobs or retrain between the ages of 45 and 54.
Okay.
Compare that to only a 54% chance of employment at 60 for those who stagnated, stayed put, and hoped for the best.
So by trying to play it safe and clinging to a shrinking job, you actually increase your chances of being unemployed later on.
Exactly. The AI survey backs this up even further. 82% of older workers who initiate a major career change report that it was fundamentally successful and helped them reach their long-term financial goals.
82%.
Yes. So the prevailing narrative is backwards. The risk isn't in moving. The true existential risk is in staying paralyzed while automation and corporate restructuring encroach on your livelihood. Action is statistically safer than inaction.
That is the ultimate takeaway for this entire first segment. Action is your best defense. Paralysis is the enemy. So let's stop talking in the abstract and break this down into a highly specific, tactical, decade-by-decade playbook.
Let's do it.
We are going to map out exactly what you should do based on the age you are right now. Let's start with the 40 to 49 age bracket. We call these the prime transition years.
To set the context for this bracket, if you're between 40 and 49, you need to internalize that you still have 20 to 25 years of your career left. You are barely past the halfway mark.
Right.
At this stage, you generally still have the physical vitality and the mental elasticity for substantial retraining. And theoretically, because you've been working for 2 decades, you have the financial runway to invest in a transition that might take 2 to 4 years to fully execute before you see the return on investment.
You have the time to go deep. So let's look at path 1 for a 40-something listener. Path 1 is healthcare, specifically transitioning into nursing. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, I'm a marketing director. I don't know the first thing about medicine.
Right.
But this is what the labor economists and researchers call a human-centric moat. AI is incredible. It can analyze an MRI scan or an X-ray faster and sometimes more accurately than a human radiologist. It can write a preliminary diagnosis. But AI cannot lift a 180-pound patient out of bed.
Exactly.
It cannot check their vitals by hand. It cannot look a terrified patient in the eye, hold their hand, and de-escalate their family's panic in a waiting room. The human element is the moat that protects the job.
And the macroeconomic demand reflects that moat. Demand for registered nurses, RNs, and advanced practice roles like nurse practitioners, NPs, is projected to grow at a sustained 5 to 6% year over year through 2033.
That's massive growth.
It is. This isn't a bubble. This is driven by the immovable demographic reality of an aging global population. The baby boomers are requiring exponentially more medical care, and there simply aren't enough humans to provide it.
So the jobs are there, and they are immune to automation. But how does a 45-year-old actually make that pivot without going back to college for 4 years with a bunch of teenagers?
The pathway here is actually very well-trodden and highly structured for adult learners. A highly effective, pragmatic route for someone without any prior medical background is what's called the CNA to RN bridge.
Let's break that down.
Now, for those unfamiliar, CNA stands for Certified Nursing Assistant. It's an entry-level credential. Depending on your state, you can get certified as a CNA in anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. It gets your foot in the door immediately.
But I want to pause here because I promised we wouldn't sugarcoat this. We have to be brutally honest about the realities of this specific transition. Because moving from a CNA to an RN is essentially trading physical destruction for mental exhaustion.
That is a very accurate way to frame it. The sources we analyzed are incredibly candid about the toll this takes. As a CNA, you are the absolute backbone of the facility, but you are doing the heavy, grueling physical labor.
Yeah.
You are lifting, turning, and transferring patients who cannot move themselves. You are bathing patients, dealing extensively with bodily fluids, and answering dozens of call lights an hour. In a standard 12-hour shift, a CNA might walk 4 to 6 miles. It can destroy your back, your knees, and your feet if you aren't careful.
Right. It's like helping your friends move heavy furniture out of a third-floor apartment, but you are doing it 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. But the flip side is, when you clock out as a CNA, you are largely done. You don't take the strategic stress of the patient's long-term survival home with you.
Precisely. But as you continue your education and bridge over to become an RN, a registered nurse, the physical load decreases significantly, but the cognitive load skyrockets.
The mental exhaustion.
Yes. As an RN, you are no longer just doing the heavy lifting. You are managing highly complex medication administration. You are coordinating intricate, multidisciplinary treatment plans with physicians and specialists. You carry immense legal liability.
Because if you make a mistake...
If you pull the wrong medication, or if you make a critical error in a patient's charting, your professional license is on the line, and potentially a human life is on the line. That level of strategic stress absolutely follows you home.
But despite that stress, the financial jump makes this transition highly viable and incredibly attractive for a midlife worker who needs to rebuild their economic foundation. Let's talk about those financials because they are life-changing.
They really are.
If you start as a CNA, the national average salary is around $41,270. It is a survival wage. But when you complete the schooling and pass your boards to make the jump to RN, the average salary more than doubles to $98,430.
And in high cost of living areas or specialized units, it's well into the 6 figures.
Exactly. Even at the average, that is an increase of over $54,000 a year. That is roughly $4,500 more a month in your pocket. That moves you from merely surviving and scraping by to actually being able to build well, save for retirement, and create security. And here is a critical shortcut for our listeners. If you already hold a non-nursing bachelor's degree, say you got a degree in communications or logistics or history 20 years ago, you don't have to start from scratch.
Right, the ABSN.
Yes, you can enroll in an accelerated Bachelor of Science in Nursing.
The ABSN is a phenomenal tool. Because you already have the core university credits, the program strips away all the electives and focuses purely on clinical nursing skills. An ABSN typically takes only 12 to 18 months of intense full-time study. It is grueling, but it's fast.
And what I find particularly encouraging about this path is the shifting demographic within the nursing profession itself. You aren't going to be the only 45-year-old in the hospital.
Not at all. The American Association of Colleges of Nursing notes a massive, sustained rise in second career nurses. We're talking about former corporate project managers, public school teachers, real estate agents, and military veterans who are making this pivot.
It's a huge wave.
And interestingly, the demographic data shows a steady rise in male nurses, who now make up about 11.2% of the nursing workforce, up from low single digits a couple of decades ago.
And hospital administrators actually love these second career nurses, don't they?
They vastly prefer them in many cases. The sources note that these second career professionals routinely excel in clinical settings because of their maturity. They've already spent 2 decades dealing with workplace stress. They know how to manage difficult personalities. They understand corporate compliance.
Who's lived a little?
Yes, they bring a level of gravity, empathy, and life experience to patient care that a 22-year-old fresh out of nursing school simply hasn't developed yet. Again, the maturity dividend pays off.
So healthcare is a massive automation-proof path one. But what if you hate hospitals? What if the sight of blood makes you pass out, but you still have a lot of physical energy, and you need a path that doesn't require taking on university debt? That brings us to path 2 for the 40 to 49 demographic, the skilled trades.
Specifically, for this age group, the data points heavily toward becoming an electrician.
Why electricians specifically?
Because while it is physical, it is generally less destructive on the joints than roofing or heavy masonry. And crucially, the financial model of the trades is incredibly friendly to adults who have mortgages to pay and families to feed.
Right, this is the earn while you learn model. I want to spend some time on this because it flips the traditional educational script completely upside down.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of education and workforce development, the union and non-union apprenticeship models in the skilled trades are essentially the antithesis of the modern university model.
How so?
Instead of paying exorbitant tuition, accumulating massive student loan debt, and spending 4 years sitting in a lecture hall completely disconnected from the labor market, you are hired as an apprentice, and you are paid an hourly wage from day one. You are working on actual job sites, learning the practical skills, and typically doing your classroom learning in the evenings or 1 day a week.
Okay, I want to play devil's advocate here on behalf of our listener. If I am a 46-year-old mid-level corporate manager making $85,000 a year and I get laid off, entering an apprenticeship sounds great in theory, but what does that day one hourly wage actually look like? Because I still have a mortgage.
That is the friction point, and we have to address it clearly. As a first-year apprentice, you typically start at roughly 40 to 50% of a fully licensed journeyman's rate. Depending on your geographic region and whether you are in a strong union state or a right-to-work state, that usually translates to a starting wage of around $14 to $22 an hour.
So if we're being honest, that is a massive pay cut for a mid-career professional. It's a shock to the system.
It is a profound pay cut, but you have to view it through the lens of a strategic, short-term retreat for a long-term victory, because that $18 an hour isn't static. In an apprenticeship, your wage is tied to your hours of experience and your mastery of the skills.
It scales up.
Right. As you hit specific milestones in your required on-the-job training, usually every 6 months to a year, your pay automatically increases. You aren't begging for a 2% cost of living raise. Your contract dictates substantial bumps as you progress.
And the light at the end of the tunnel is bright. Once you complete the roughly 4 or 5 years of the apprenticeship and pass your state licensing exam to become a journeyman electrician, the median salary jumps to $62,350.
And that's just the median.
Right. Top earners, specialized commercial electricians, and master electricians easily clear 6 figures, particularly if they are willing to work overtime or take on industrial maintenance roles.
And here is where the age factor, which is the whole theme of this deep dive, flicks from being a liability to a massive, undeniable advantage. Our sources highlight a fascinating, almost counterintuitive phenomenon. Electrical apprentices who begin their training at age 50 or older have a near-zero dropout rate.
Wait, near zero, nobody quits.
Statistically, it is negligible. Contrast that with a 30% dropout rate for younger cohorts in their late teens and 20s.
That's a huge gap.
Think about why that is. When an older worker who has already survived corporate layoffs and the grind of the modern economy commits to a 4-year electrical apprenticeship, they treat it like a lifeline. They show up on time every single day. They pass their drug tests. They don't complain about the early hours. They put their head down and they finish the program. Master electricians and contractors recognize this.
And it extends beyond just showing up. The sources also mention that employers actively prefer older apprentices for specific types of work, right?
Yes, particularly in residential service. Imagine you run an electrical contracting business. You receive a service call from a homeowner whose kitchen wiring is sparking.
High stress situation.
Very high stress. If you send a 19-year-old apprentice into that home, the homeowner is going to be nervous. But if you send a mature 48-year-old professional who speaks clearly, looks them in the eye, and calmly explains the repair process, the homeowner feels completely at ease. Your age projects competence, reliability, and authority. The contractor values that immensely because it leads to repeat business and high customer satisfaction.
It's the maturity dividend in action, perfectly applied to a blue-collar setting. Okay, so that's healthcare and the trades. Let's look at path 3 for the 40-somethings, the strategic pivot in your current field. This is for the listener who says, I can't lift patients, and I can't take a pay cut to $18 an hour. I need to stay in my lane, but my lane is disappearing.
This is a highly nuanced path. This isn't about throwing away 20 years of hard-earned domain experience. It's about bolting new, impenetrable armor onto it. If you are 45 and you are watching your industry automate the tasks you used to do manually, your institutional knowledge is still incredibly valuable, but your execution skills are obsolete.
Right. So the tactical move here is transitioning your personal brand and your daily workflow from execution to strategy. You take your 2 decades of knowing exactly how a global supply chain works or how arcane human resources compliance functions, and you bolt AI proficiency onto that foundation.
Yes.
You stop trying to compete with the machine in writing the report, and you become the person who designs the prompts, implements the automation, and audits the output. You become the architect of the system rather than the cog inside of it.
Exactly. The AI knows how to process 10,000 rows of logistics data in a millisecond, but the AI has absolutely no idea what that data actually means for the business's quarterly goals or how a specific supply chain bottleneck will impact a key client relationship.
But you do.
You know that. By mastering the tools, you leverage your historical context. You become the translator between the algorithm and the executive board.
That is a phenomenal pivot for the 40-something professional. But let's shift our timeline forward. Let's talk about the listener who is between 50 and 59. This is a very different game. We call this decade the strategic years.
The context shifts dramatically in this bracket. If you are 55, you only have 10 to 15 years left until traditional retirement. You are likely in your peak earning years, meaning your lifestyle expenses are likely at their highest. You might have kids in college. And crucially, you have significantly less time to endure a lengthy retraining process. You simply cannot afford to spend 6 years completely out of the full-time workforce.
Right. The runway is shorter, so the calculus of what makes a good transition changes entirely.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of educational investment, we have to issue a severe, data-backed warning here about the extreme danger of the traditional 4-year degree at this age.
Let's get into this, because society tells us education is always a good investment. You're saying at 55 that might be a lie.
It can be a financially catastrophic lie. The data we have from medical school return on investment studies serves as the perfect, stark cautionary tale for any massive educational undertaking later in life.
Walk us through it.
Let's look at the brutal math, step by step. If a 35-year-old decides they want to become a doctor, they go to medical school. They accumulate, on average, around $300,000 in student debt. They spend 4 grueling years in medical school earning nothing, and then 3 to 5 years in residency earning a relatively low salary, maybe $65,000 to $75,000 a year.
Okay, so they are in their early 40s by the time they are a full-fledged attending physician making the big money.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they are still $300,000 in the hole, plus the opportunity cost of the wages they didn't earn for a decade. The economic models show that their full economic break-even point, meaning the exact moment where their new high doctor's salary finally pays off the debt and surpasses the total lifetime wealth they would have accumulated if they just stayed in their old mid-level job, hits around age 47 or 48.
Okay, so they break even at 48, and then they have roughly 17 years until age 65 to just rake in the profits and build massive wealth. That makes sense for a 35-year-old. But what happens if they start that exact same journey at 45?
The math collapses completely. If you start that exact same medical path at age 45, the debt is the same, the time out of the workforce is the same, but the break-even point pushes out to age 54 or 55. That leaves you with fewer than 10 net positive working years before traditional retirement age. You spend a decade torturing yourself just to get back to zero, and then you have to retire before you can build any real wealth.
That is terrifying.
The sources are definitive on this principle. Every 5-year delay in starting a massive educational undertaking like medical school, or even an expensive 4-year degree or a full-time MBA program, pushes the break-even point 4 to 6 years later into your life. At 50 or 55, you simply do not have the chronological time to go into massive debt and spend years out of the labor market. The return on investment window is entirely too small. You will run out of time before you run out of debt.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you don't need a 4-year degree to make a highly lucrative automation-proof pivot in your 50s. If you are in this bracket, path one is quick certifications and independent consulting.
This is the essence of knowledge arbitrage. At 55, you have 30 years of incredibly specific battle-tested experience. You are not going back to school to learn something new. You are packaging your lifetime of existing experience into a highly focused premium service.
What does the data say about the viability of this? Can you actually make a living, or is consultant just a polite word for being unemployed?
It is highly viable if structured correctly. According to the labor data, independent consultants in the U.S. average around $98,690 a year. But that's just the average. If you leverage deep, niche expertise, say SAP implementation or highly technical supply chain process consulting, the data shows your pay can boost by 39%, pushing you well over $127,000 annually.
I want to pause and clarify for our listeners who might not be in enterprise tech. When you say SAP implementation, what exactly does that mean in practical terms?
SAP is a massive, incredibly complex enterprise software system that giant corporations use to manage everything from their accounting to their global supply chains to their human resources. Implementing it or upgrading it is notoriously difficult and prone to catastrophic failure if not managed perfectly.
It's a huge headache for them.
Exactly. If you have spent 20 years working inside a corporation surviving SAP upgrades, you know where all the bodies are buried. You know exactly why these projects fail. You can walk into another company that is about to undergo an SAP transition and charge them an exorbitant hourly rate simply to advise them on what not to do. You are selling risk mitigation based on your historical scars.
And here's the kicker for this path. AI tools are your absolute best friend when you transition to independent consulting. If you are a solo consultant at 55, you don't need to hire a staff. You use AI as your junior analyst to crunch market data. You use it as your copywriter to draft your client proposals. You use it as your research assistant to prep for meetings.
It's incredible leverage.
And AI extends your solo capabilities so massively that you can command high corporate rates while working part-time from your home office. And you can easily do this kind of high-value, low physical stress work well into your 70s, completely on your own terms.
That is the ideal outcome. Now let's look at Path 2 for the 50 to 59 bracket, which is entirely different. Path 2 is the public sector. We are talking specifically about local, state, and federal government work. The data strongly points to the government sector as an AI sanctuary.
I love that term, an AI sanctuary. It sounds like a sci-fi bunker where you go to hide from the robots. Why is the government considered a sanctuary?
Because, practically speaking, government adoption of artificial intelligence and sweeping automation is currently lagging about 5 to 7 years behind the private sector. It is moving at a glacial pace. And the friction preventing the government from automating your job comes from two massive structural barriers: legacy hardware and strict data privacy laws.
Break those down for me.
According to deep dive reports from Lightcast and BetterGov's, 45% of the barrier to AI adoption in government is simply aging, obsolete tech infrastructure. We're talking about municipal water departments running on software from 1998, or state unemployment offices relying on mainframe computers from the 1980s.
So you couldn't run AI if they wanted to.
You cannot run a cutting-edge large language model on a system that still uses floppy disks. It physically cannot support modern AI.
Okay, so the hardware is ancient. What about the privacy issue?
That is the larger hurdle. 62% of the barrier relates to strict, legally binding data privacy mandates. A private marketing firm can feed all of its customer data into a cloud-based AI to generate insights. A state health department absolutely cannot feed its citizens private medical or tax data into a public commercial AI model without violating dozens of federal laws. The compliance hurdles are staggering.
So if you are 52 years old and you feel like the private sector is moving too fast and AI is breathing down your neck, you pivot. You get a job as a project manager or an administrator or an analyst at a state agency or a municipal government. You are essentially stepping into a time machine. You are gaining a guaranteed 5 to 10-year buffer of job security where human-driven manual workflows are still the absolute legal standard.
Exactly. You are buying time. Plus, pivoting into the public sector often provides access to highly stable healthcare benefits and, in many jurisdictions, a defined benefit pension plan if you stay long enough, giving you a smooth, secure glide path right into retirement.
That is a brilliant tactical retreat. Okay, Path 3 for this 50 to 59 group is healthcare administration. Now, we talked about bedside nursing earlier for the 40-somethings, but if you are in your mid-50s, the physical demands of lifting patients and running around a ward for 12 hours might be an absolute non-starter. Your knees just won't take it.
That's a biological reality. But the healthcare sector is massive, and it needs immense organizational leadership. If you have spent your career in management, logistics, or operations, you look at the administrative side of the human-centric moat.
Right. Things like medical office management, healthcare compliance, patient coordination, or even pursuing a direct entry Master of Science in nursing, which focuses more on leadership and administration if you already have a bachelor's degree.
These administrative roles are far less physically demanding, but they still exist within a sector that is shielded from AI-driven job loss because of the heavy regulatory environment and the need for human accountability. They require extreme organization, a deep understanding of regulatory compliance, and, above all, maturity.
The maturity dividend again.
Always. A 55-year-old former corporate logistics manager is perfectly suited to take a 6-month certification course and then run the complex scheduling and billing operations of a large, multi-physician medical office. In healthcare administration, calm, grounded experience is valued over youthful energy every single time.
Which brings us perfectly to the final demographic bracket in our tactical playbook, ages 60 and above. We call this the finish line strategy.
This is a very delicate phase. At 60 plus, you are within 5 to 10 years of full retirement age. Your tolerance for massive life disruption, educational debt, or extreme physical exertion should be absolutely minimal. You do not want to be taking out loans, and you certainly don't want to be starting 5-year electrical apprenticeships.
Definitely not.
The entire strategic goal of this decade is simply bridging the gap. You are trying to maintain income and health insurance until you can seamlessly transition to Medicare and Social Security.
And this raises an important question and, frankly, a critical warning that we need to emphasize. Let's talk about the trap of early Social Security.
This is perhaps the most common and most devastating mistake older workers make. When a 62-year-old worker faces sudden job loss, whether it's due to an AI software making their role redundant or a general corporate downsizing, the immediate panic-driven temptation is to just throw their hands up, declare themselves retired, and file for early Social Security benefits. They think, I'm close enough, I'll just take the money now.
And why is that a trap? It's their money, right?
It is their money, but the mathematical penalty for taking it early is unforgiving and permanent. Taking Social Security at age 62 permanently reduces your monthly benefit payout by up to 30% compared to waiting until your full retirement age, which is typically 66 or 67 depending on your birth year. It is a permanent haircut on your baseline survival income.
And let me jump in here as the realist. If inflation outpaces your fixed, reduced income, which, as we've all seen recently, it absolutely can and will, you might find yourself in a terrifying position at age 68 or 70.
A very dark place.
You realize you can't afford groceries and property taxes on your reduced benefits, so you are forced back into the labor market. But now you are nearly 70, you've been out of the workforce for 8 years, your skills are incredibly stale, and you have a permanently crippled safety net. You do not want to pull that ripcord at 62 out of sheer panic.
Exactly. It is a one-way door that leads to poverty for many people. So the question becomes, what are the tactical, low-risk moves to bridge that 5 to 7 year gap safely?
Path 1 is exactly what we discussed for the 50-somethings, but scaled back. Part-time consulting. You take exactly what you have been doing for the last 40 years, you step out of the exhausting 50-hour-a-week corporate rat race, and you contract yourself back to your old industry or even your previous employer for 15 to 20 hours a week. It bridges the income gap, it keeps your mind sharp, but it eliminates the burnout.
Path 2 is finding low-stress, protected employment. We are talking about identifying roles that offer necessary health benefits and require a physical human presence, but crucially, leave your evenings and weekends entirely free of stress. You want a job that you do not think about for 1 second after you clock out.
Jobs like being a medical receptionist. You are dealing with patients face-to-face. You are providing that human touch, and you get access to the clinic's health benefits, but you aren't doing the heavy physical lifting of a nurse. Or consider part-time bookkeeping for local small businesses. You can use modern AI tools to handle the rote math and data entry in minutes, but you provide the human oversight and the trusted, mature handshake that the local plumber or bakery owner actually values.
Another fantastic example that the data highlights for this age group is driving a school bus.
Yeah.
It sounds almost cliche, but look at the realities of the job. It is highly protected, it is deeply human-centric, AI is not going to be legally permitted to drive a 50-foot bus full of 30 screaming children through suburban traffic anytime in the foreseeable future. In many municipalities, it is heavily unionized, offering great protections. It is inherently part-time, usually a few hours in the morning and a few in the afternoon, and it often comes with incredibly robust state health and retirement benefits. It is the perfect bridge job.
And path three for the 60-plus crowd is the semi-retirement business. What's fascinating here is a statistic we pulled from the Vogelsang study on later life career changes. They found that a stunning 26% of all retirees eventually unretire.
More than 1 in 4. They go back to work. Now, sometimes this is absolutely driven by financial necessity, as we discussed with the Social Security trap. But very often, the study notes they go back to work for social engagement, a sense of routine, and a desperate need for a sense of purpose. Sitting on the porch gets old after 6 months.
So, developing a second career skill set at 60, like opening a small consulting firm, starting a specialized local service business, or doing freelance writing, isn't just a financial bridge. It is essential for your cognitive longevity and your mental well-being. It keeps you engaged with the world.
Let's shift gears and make all of this theoretical data, these percentages and models, deeply real. Let's talk about 4 specific second career success stories pulled directly from the qualitative research data. These are real human trajectories that embody exactly what we've been discussing.
Yes, let's put faces to the numbers. Story 1 is the corporate manager who transitioned to nursing. I love this one because it illustrates the grit required. This individual was 44 years old. They were working in mid-level corporate management, dealing with spreadsheets and endless Zoom meetings, and they saw the writing on the wall. Their department was being steadily automated and downsized, so they made the pivot.
But look at how structured their path was. They didn't just quit and apply to a 4-year nursing school on a whim. They started by working as a CNA, a certified nursing assistant, for 6 full months. They
Oh.
did the grueling entry-level work. They wiped down patients. They emptied bedpans.
You got in the trenches.
They did this specifically to get their foot in the door of the hospital system, to start earning immediately, and most importantly, to confirm to themselves that they could actually handle the harsh realities of the clinical environment before they invested thousands of dollars in tuition.
That is such a smart, risk-mitigated approach. Once they knew they could handle the environment, they leveled up. They completed an LPN program, licensed practical nurse, which took about a year of night classes and weekend clinicals while they were still working. And then they bridged from LPN to RN. By age 47, just 3 years after deciding to change their life, they were a fully licensed registered nurse.
Imagine that psychological shift. From staring at meaningless corporate spreadsheets at 43, terrified of being laid off by an algorithm, to standing in a hospital ward at 47 as a fully licensed, indispensable medical professional. They are currently earning $78,000 a year, and they possess absolute, ironclad job security. AI is not taking their job. And because they have that ingrained corporate ambition and maturity, now at age 52, they aren't stopping. They're already looking at nurse practitioner programs to push their income well over the 6-figure mark.
That is the ultimate pivot. Okay, story 2 is the accountant who became an electrician. This is the trades pathway. This individual was 45 years old when they were suddenly laid off from a comfortable, air-conditioned accounting firm. The accounting software had gotten too good, and the firm needed fewer humans to process the numbers. They were devastated. But instead of trying to fight for another shrinking accounting job, they completely flipped the script and entered a 5-year commercial electrical apprenticeship.
We have to acknowledge the absolute shock to the ego and the lifestyle here. Going from an office job to a construction site in the dead of winter at age 45 is humbling. And during those 5 years of the apprenticeship, they were making between $35,000 and $55,000 a year. It was incredibly tight. They had to cut back on vacations. They had to budget meticulously. But it was paid learning. They were not going into debt.
And here is the phenomenal payoff. At age 50, they completed their thousands of hours, passed the state board exam, and reached journeyman status. Their salary immediately bumped up to $82,000, but it didn't stop there. Now they are 55 years old. They aren't just pulling wire anymore. They run their own boutique electrical contracting business. They have 3 younger employees working for them, and they are personally taking home $175,000 a year in profit.
And listen to how they framed it in the qualitative interview. To quote this individual directly, "I make more now than I ever did as an accountant, and I can't be automated." That is the maturity dividend in its purest form. Why is his contracting business so successful? Because he used to be an accountant. He knows exactly how to manage payroll, how to bid on contracts profitably, and how to manage cash flow skills that most young electricians struggle with immensely. He stacked his past life onto his new life.
Incredible. Let's look at story 3, which highlights the consulting pivot we talked about for the 50-somethings. This is the story of a middle manager in logistics who was laid off at age 52.
Now, the typical response at 52 is to panic. You update your resume, you go on LinkedIn, and you send out 500 applications, desperately trying to compete with 30-year-olds for another generic middle management job that will probably be automated in 3 years anyway. It is a race to the bottom.
But this individual didn't do that. They took a tactical pause. They took 6 months, lived strictly off their severance package, and locked themselves in a room to deeply learn how to use advanced AI implementation tools. They learned how the models worked, how to integrate them into legacy systems, and how to write complex prompts. And then they leaned heavily on their 25 years of domain experience in logistics.
This is a brilliant strategic maneuver. Now, at 56 years old, they are working entirely for themselves as an independent AI integration consultant. And the irony is beautiful. They are currently consulting for their former employer who laid them off, plus 4 other logistics companies in the same sector. They are earning $140,000 a year, and because they are so efficient with the AI tools, they are only working 25 hours a week. They use the very technology that threatened them to amplify their existing knowledge and essentially buy back their time.
That is mastering the machine instead of being crushed by it. And our final story, story 4, is a fantastic example of the finish line strategy. It's about a data entry clerk who transitioned to a medical office manager. At 58 years old, their data entry job was rapidly evaporating. Optical character recognition and AI data scraping were doing in seconds what took them a week. They were terrified. At 58, the prospect of starting over is paralyzing.
It is deeply paralyzing, but instead of giving up and taking early Social Security at a massive penalty, they looked at the human-centric moat. They enrolled in a highly focused 6-month medical office certification program at a local community college.
Just 6 months. That is an incredibly short runway.
Yes, and because they had spent 30 years doing meticulous data entry, they had incredibly deep innate organizational skills. They understood how to manage complex filing systems and avoid errors. They got a job at a busy clinical practice, and within 3 years, by age 61, their maturity and meticulous nature led to them being promoted to the head office manager, earning a stable $58,000 a year with full benefits.
And their plan now is exactly what we discussed. They are safely sheltered in this human-centric, highly protected environment. They are going to work there comfortably until they are 68 years old, fully securing their retirement, paying off their remaining debts, and maximizing their Social Security benefits to the absolute highest tier before they finally step away.
These 4 stories prove that reinvention is entirely possible at any age, provided you follow the data and choose the right path. But as analysts, we have to address the elephant in the room. We can lay out the data, the salaries, and the pathways all day long. But the absolute hardest part of this transition isn't passing the nursing exam. It isn't finding an apprenticeship. And it isn't even managing the temporary pay cut.
No, the hardest part is the mental game. It's the war you fight inside your own head.
You are absolutely right. The psychological toll of a midlife career disruption is profound, and we do a disservice to the listener if we ignore it. What's fascinating here is the deep research from the KMN counseling study on midlife transitions. They looked extensively at the cognitive and emotional complexities involved when someone over 45 is forced to change their life trajectory.
Let's dig into that KMN study. What exactly did they find happens to someone mentally when their job is threatened?
They identified several critical psychological phenomena. One of the most prevalent is something called presenteeism. This is a state where a worker is physically sitting at their desk, they're logged into their computer, but their brain is completely elsewhere. They are totally unengaged, paralyzed by the stress and the ambient anxiety of their impending obsolescence. They know the layoff is coming, but they can't bring themselves to act.
Right. You're at work, you're answering emails, but your internal monologue is just spinning with catastrophic anxiety. You were telling yourself, I'm too old to learn this new software. If I go back to school, I'm going to be sitting in a classroom looking like an idiot trying to compete with 25-year-olds who grew up with iPads. I cannot afford a pay cut at this stage of my life. I'll lose the house.
Those specific fears are universal. Every single person who has ever made a midlife pivot has heard those exact voices in their head. The fear of embarrassment, the fear of financial ruin, the loss of identity. When you have been Bob the accountant for 25 years and suddenly you aren't an accountant anymore, who are you? It is a form of ego death.
But the K-Menon study doesn't just diagnose the despair, it also outlines the mechanics of the breakthroughs, right? How do people actually get past that paralysis?
They found that successful midlife career transitions are almost always triggered by massive external pressures, like a layoff, an industry collapse, or a health scare. But that trauma forces a psychological process they call meaning-making and role adjustment. It violently forces the worker to strip away the fragile ego of their old corporate job title and rebuild a core identity grounded in actual resilience. They realize they are not their job title. They are their ability to adapt and survive.
And the research points to a fascinating concept called post-traumatic growth, or PTG. We hear a lot about PTSD, but post-traumatic growth is real. When you get laid off at 50, it is legitimately traumatic. It hurts. But the psychological data shows that older workers actually possess significantly higher baseline of emotional resilience and a greater capacity for positive emotions than younger workers facing the same shock.
It makes logical sense when you think about it. If you are 50, you have survived multiple economic recessions. You survived the dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic. You have likely survived personal crises, family illnesses, maybe a divorce or the loss of a parent. You have a track record of surviving terrible things. You actually have the emotional toolkit and the perspective to survive this career shift, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
And a massive part of activating that resilience is the ability to cognitively reframe the situation. You have to change how you talk to yourself about the math. Let's take the very real fear of the pay cut. If you take a 40% pay cut to enter an electrical apprenticeship or to go back to nursing school full-time, your immediate emotional reaction is that this is a massive step backward. It feels like a failure.
But intellectually, you have to reframe that temporary loss. It is not a step backward. It is a calculated capital investment for long-term stability. You are buying future security with present-day discomfort.
Exactly. I tell people this all the time, and it usually stops them in their tracks. Being completely unemployed because your specific industry was just automated by an AI agent is a 100% pay cut. And it is a prominent one. Taking a temporary 40% hit right now to secure a license or a trade that a server farm can never replicate is the absolute smartest, most aggressive financial move you can make. It is accepting short-term pain for long-term survival.
So how do we operationalize everything we've talked about today? We've covered the macro data, the specific career paths, the financials, and the psychology. How does the listener actually take this and map it out for their own life?
Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. We are going to walk you through a step-by-step, age-appropriate career planning exercise. If you are driving or walking, just actively visualize this. But I strongly encourage you, sit down this weekend, get a physical pen and a piece of paper, and do this exercise.
Step 1.
Step 1, assess your runway. You need hard, cold numbers, not vague anxieties floating in your head. Write down your exact current age. Then, write down the exact number of years you have until your target realistic retirement date. Not the dream date, the real date. And finally, calculate your financial runway in months. Look at your bank accounts. If your current income stopped tomorrow morning, how many months can you survive paying your baseline bills on your liquid savings, any guaranteed severance, or a working spouse's income while you retrain? You need to know if your runway is 3 months or 3 years.
That leads directly into step 2. Calculate your ROI threshold. This is where you do the brutal math we discussed earlier regarding medical school and apprenticeships. Look at the path you are considering. How much will your retraining cost out of pocket in tuition and books? Now add to that the opportunity cost. How much will you lose in wages while you are sitting in a classroom or working for lower apprentice pay? Add those two numbers together. That massive number is your total transition investment.
And then comes the reality check.
Precisely. Now you calculate how much your new future earnings must increase per year to pay back that total investment before you hit the retirement date you wrote down in step 1. You must look at that final required annual increase and ask, is this mathematically realistic? If the math requires you to work until you are 85 years old just to break even on the student loans, you cannot take that path. You need a different strategy.
Step 3, choose the path. Based on the hard score you generated in step 2, you categorize your next move. Do you have the 3 years of runway and the youth required to survive a 2 to 4 year retraining program, like an accelerated BSN or an electrical apprenticeship? If your runway is shorter, do you only have time for a 1 to 2 year certification in healthcare administration or IT security? If you have 0 runway, do you need to execute a 6-month pivot into the public sector? Or do you need to immediately launch an independent consulting business next Monday to bridge the gap? Let the math dictate the path.
And finally, step 4, account for ageism. Do not be naive and pretend it doesn't exist. It does, and we proved it in segment 1. So formulate a specific, rehearsed plan to position your age as an undeniable asset in every single interview. When a 30-year-old hiring manager asks about your 25 years of experience, you do not apologize for being older. You do not try to act hip. You explicitly, confidently highlight your reliability. You talk about a massive crisis you managed in 2012 that they were too young to even remember. You highlight your deep professional network, your ability to handle stress without breaking down, and your highly developed soft skills. You aggressively sell the maturity dividend.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It means the older you are, the more decisively you need to act. When you were 25, you have the luxury of spending 3 years finding yourself and making mistakes. At 45, 55, or 60, you do not have that luxury. You need to look at the cold data, pick a path that the AI algorithms cannot physically or legally touch, and execute the plan without looking back.
I will leave you with this final, perhaps provocative thought to mull over as you do that exercise this weekend. We spend so much time in this modern economy fearing automation. We view it as this dark cloud coming to destroy our livelihoods. But what if the AI disruption that eventually forces you out of your current stressful, unfulfilling corporate job is actually the catalyst you always needed?
That is an interesting way to look at it.
What if it is the event that finally frees you to pursue a career with true, tangible meaning and genuine longevity? Whether that is caring for patients, building physical infrastructure, or consulting on your own terms. What if this massive AI wave isn't the end of your usefulness, but exactly the forceful push you're required to stop being a disposable cog in a corporate machine and finally build a human-centric legacy that you can be proud of?
That is an incredibly powerful perspective shift, and it is the perfect place to land the plane for today. We have given you the deep playbook for the physical career pivot. We've shown you how to move into spaces AI can't reach, but what if you decide you don't want to leave? What if you want to stay and fight it out right in the middle of the digital economy? Next time on the Deep Dive, episode 15, the AI skills stack, what to actually learn. Everyone says learn AI tools. Nobody tells you which ones or how. Here's the exact 90-day curriculum that makes you valuable. Make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe to Surviving AI on YouTube at Surviving AI Risk and wherever you get podcasts. See you next time.